We're here with Steve Cohen, co-author of the best-selling book Getting In and author of the Forbes column How to Pay for College Without Going Broke. Welcome, Steve.
Nice to be here, Mike.
Steve, we know that college is expensive. You've been through it twice yourself. How can middle-class families pay for college, especially when they haven't been able to save enough?
Mike, college is probably the second largest expenditure that most families are going to undertake, second only to mortgage on their home. And the first thing that a family has to recognize is that college is an investment, not just an expense. The second thing is that the published price of a college is not the real price. It's just like buying an airline seat. You don't pay the same amount as the person sitting on either side of you. It depends on when you booked the ticket, what sort of discount you got, what the supply and demand was at that particular moment.
Steve, there's something called the EFC, the Expected Family Contribution. What exactly is that?
Mike, we're all expected to contribute something to our kids' college costs. And the expected family contribution is a calculation that's made by both the U.S. government and the individual colleges about how much an individual family is expected to contribute. And it's a function of a couple things. First, it's a function of how much you, the family, earn. And second, how much you and your child has in savings and in other assets. And they combine that in a calculation, and they come up with what they call the EFC, the expected family contribution, for you, for your child.
Steve, how much are we talking about?
You can't predict exactly how much it's going to be, Mike, but here's a pretty good estimate. For a family that earns, say, $100,000 a year and has savings and investments of about $50,000 outside of their actual real estate, the expected family contribution will be about $7,000 a year. Now, that's a lot of money, and it's completely unrealistic by many, many standards. But that's the government's going-in perspective of how much a family can contribute.
How does a family figure out this EFC? We understand that there's now something called the net cost calculator that many colleges are utilizing as well too. How does this all going to work this year?
There are a couple ways, Mike, that families can figure out what their expected family contribution may be. And remember, that's just a starting point in the negotiation, in the discussion with the college. But here's how you figure out what your EFC really is. First, you can do it online. We have references in the book, in Getting In, of good sites that have free calculators. The second is that every college in the United States next year is going to be required to have an online calculator for their particular school, which takes into account how much their school really costs, the type of financial aid they offer. It's called a net price calculator, and it's, again, available on every college site, and every college has a slightly different version of this. They can customize it as they see fit, but it has to be up and running this next year.
You've been focusing on middle-class families with incomes of $100,000, $150,000. There are a lot of families that make a lot less. What's the story for them?
Mike, there's money available. There's money available for most families, middle-class families, and certainly lower-income families. When we read headlines about Congress considering financial aid cutbacks or financial aid increases, it very often refers to something called the Pell Grant. Families which earn under $30,000 a year can get outright grants from colleges. That's the first thing. Middle-class families, $60,000 to $100,000, and sometimes even more than $100,000 a year, will be able to get some financial aid from colleges. But remember, financial aid is not necessarily scholarship or grant money.
What about families that make more than $150,000? Is there any financial aid for them?
No, just the opposite. There is money available, but a couple things. One, you have to apply for it. Second, you have to ask for it. And third, it's going to depend on which school you apply to and what your particular circumstances are that given year. Let me give you a good example. Financial aid, Mike, is comprised of three factors, three components. The first and most attractive, obviously, are scholarships. Scholarships are also referred to as grants. The second is work-study, where for never more than 20 hours a week, and usually about 10 hours a week, students can work on campus and get some financial aid from the college in exchange for working. Whether it's work in the dining room or work in the rec center, or in the library, there are lots and lots of jobs on campus that comprise work-study. And the third and largest portion of financial aid are loans. And loans come from lots of different sources. They come from the government, they come from the college's own resources, they come from outside loan programs.
Steve, are there ways to reduce the expected family contribution?
Mike, yes, there are ways to reduce the expected family contribution. In fact, most of them are legal. And we can tell you exactly how to do it, but not obviously in this sort of situation where we're talking to lots of families. But if you contact us, we'll put you in touch with people who can tell you, who have experience with this, and say, don't put your money in this particular type of savings, put it in a different type of savings, such as an IRA. The one thing I will say to all families is don't, in a year or two before the child applies to college, think that you're going to have less of an exposure by shifting assets into the child's name. That absolutely will backfire, because kids are expected to contribute a portion of their savings. In fact, they're expected to contribute a larger portion of their savings than the parents' portion of savings. So they'll be hit with 20 or 30% of their savings every year by the college in terms of contribution. So the first thing is, don't shift money into your kid's account.
How does a family go about applying for financial aid? We hear these expressions, the FAFSA and the profile. What exactly are those, and how do the colleges utilize them?
Mike, the process of applying for financial aid is much like root canal surgery without anesthesia. It's difficult, it's painful, one doesn't look forward to it, but it's necessary. The first thing you have to remember is to get money in almost all situations. The only exception to this rule is really merit scholarship, and we can talk about that a little bit later, or athletic scholarship. But the way a family goes about getting financial aid is first to ask for it. And they ask for it by applying. And you have to fill out at least 2 sets of forms. And you typically do this online. The first form is called the FAFSA. And it's a government form, it's available only online, and it stands for the free form for financial aid. I don't even remember the exact words, it's so painful to try to fill this out, because it is more complicated, it is more difficult to fill out than tax forms, and you need your tax forms to fill it out. So have those ready when you go online to begin the process of filling out the FAFSA. The second is what second set of forms each college requires on its own. And there are 2 different types of forms that colleges typically require. One is called the CSS profile, and that is a form that's administered by the College Board, the same folks who administer the SATs. They have this form online. Many colleges, particularly private colleges, require that you fill that out online and submit it to the college and to the College Board itself. The second option, some colleges just have their own individual financial aid form. And it says right on the college's website which forms they require. But it's always going to be first the FAFSA form, and second either the CSS profile or the college's own financial aid form. You just have to sit down and do it.
Steve, this sounds really complicated. Does it make sense for a family to think about hiring someone to help them with these forms?
Mike, it's a very good question. There are a number of firms out there that charge typically in the range of $500 to $1,000 to help a family through the process. And if you contact us, and we'll put a slide up in a moment, how to contact us, we'll tell you some of the better firms that we've worked with to do that. In fact, I've done it myself twice, looking for help in filling out the forms. I've also done it on my own to know what the pain is truly like. But what these firms can do is know what forms are necessary, what tax records, what banking records, what property records are required, and then take you through or actually fill out the forms themselves on your behalf and submit them on time for you. So I found personally it was well worth the money in getting through the process.
Steve, we read all the time that there are lots of money that goes unclaimed, millions of dollars out there in terms of financial aid that families just need to have some help looking for. And there are people that advertise that they'll help you find them for a cost. Is this something that a family should utilize?
It's a 2-part question, Mike. It's an important question. First, there's not millions of dollars available in scholarship money. There's probably closer to billions of dollars of money available for scholarships. Most of that money, however, is administered by the college itself. Each individual college knows where the money is, how to apply for it, and whether your child is going to be eligible for a particular scholarship pool. Second, you should never, ever, ever pay for a scholarship search service. Everybody has access to the same database of financial aid information. It makes no sense at all for you to pay someone to put your basic information into that database to get a list of scholarships you may be eligible for. Don't do it. It's a marketing ploy, and it's a legitimate marketing ploy when it's done for free, but you should never pay for it.
You mentioned merit scholarships before. What exactly are merit scholarships and how do they work?
Merit scholarships, Mike, are the equivalent of intellectual athletic scholarships. Colleges are using merit scholarships to attract brighter, hardworking, more successful academic kids to their particular college. And colleges are using it as an incentive to get a kid to go to, say, a less prestigious or a less, quote, highly ranked college than to go to a better known college. And they use the merit scholarship to incite the kid and incentivize the kid to go there.
Once a student's been accepted and the family has received the financial aid award, often along with the acceptance letter, is that amount set in stone?
Mike, families receive their financial aid offer at the same time, typically, when the child hears that he or she has been accepted. That amount is not set in stone because the financial aid officers can exercise something called professional judgment. They have a little bit of discretion. And one of the strongest pieces of advice we can give any family is when you get that offer from the college, pick up the phone and contact the financial aid officer responsible for your child. Their name may be on it, maybe by region where you live. Contact the person at the college and make that person your newest best friend. Because if you explain honestly and candidly what you're facing, what situation, what challenges financially you're facing, they have some professional judgment and discretion that they can shift monies or even find more monies for your child.
Recently, there have been a number of articles in the New York Times and other periodicals talking about in-state and out-of-state students and how many colleges now are really looking for that out-of-state applicant. Can you explain a little bit about how this whole in-state, out-of-state philosophy seems to be working with colleges?
Colleges and universities all across the country, if they're public universities, if they're supported by state legislatures and state revenues, typically have two different tuition levels. A lower tuition level for in-state students and a higher, often a substantially higher, 2, 3, 4 times higher tuition for out-of-state students. And in the past, and we're talking in the past being just a couple of years ago, 2, 3, 4 years ago, it was incredibly hard for an out-of-state student to get into one of the better state-run universities, such as the University of Michigan, the University of Virginia, the University of California system. And the reason was that so many in-state kids wanted to go to these absolutely terrific state schools. Then the budget crisis hit. Individual state budget crises, the national budget crisis, and states decided, let's bring in more out-of-state students who are going to pay the higher tuition. Let me address something else about in-state versus out-of-state, though. Many out-of-state parents and kids say, well, why don't we have the child apply as an out-of-state student, get into this terrific school, and establish residence. And after a year, maybe 2 years at the most, our son or daughter will be able to get in-state tuition, a third of the price. It doesn't work that way. At most state universities, there's an absolute rule, sometimes legislation, that says if you were admitted as an out-of-state student, you have to stay an out-of-state student the entire time you're here. And they tell you that on the orientation when you first visit a college, because lots of parents and kids have the same idea. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. They want those tuition dollars.
We've been talking with Steve Cohen, co-author of the best-selling book, Getting In. Thank you, Steve.
Nice to be here, Mike.